Well, friends, welcome back to the podcast. We've got a good one here for you today. My friend Steve Carter is on the podcast. I deeply respect Steve, and his new book is live. I want to encourage you to go grab a copy. We're going to talk about it. Grieve, breathe, receive. And I want to share what this podcast is and what it isn't. And so while Steve is an incredible leader, writer, communicator, pastor, he's over at the Craft and Character podcast. Make sure to check that out. Steve has quite a story, and he shares about that today. He was next in line behind Bill Hybels with one other leader to take over at Willow Creek Community Church, and a lot of things happened. You may have heard the story, and there was a lot of carnage there, but I want to remind you that this podcast, we are about hope, and we are about health, and in this case, we're about healing. And so we get to hear about Steve's healing story. This is not just talking about the carnage of that. This is not us reporting on that or trying to get a news feed on what happened, us dig for information. It's actually to see what he has been through since and how he truly is becoming a new creation. So if you're a pastor, especially buckle up for this one. This is a really good one. Love and deeply respect Steve and his work across the country, but also as a local pastor now back in the Chicagoland area. Enjoy my conversation with my friend, Steve Carter. We get it. You're busy. You want to grow, and we want to help. You're passionate about your craft because it deeply matters to you. Your faith is important. It's your foundation. At Stay Forth, we coach leaders to avoid burnout, live and lead with clarity, purpose, and from a place of health. We want you to experience long-term impact. Welcome to the journey. Steve, my man, welcome to the podcast.
Man, Alan, it's so good to be with you, bro.
Man, congrats. This book has been brewing in you for a long time. We're going to talk about it. But seriously, man, huge accomplishment to get this thing out in the world. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I'm feeling really just grateful. I think in one sense, you look back out of some of the darkest times of my life, and to see the healing and the goodness of God through it all, and to be, I'm not going to say like I'm fully on the other side of it, but I would just say just in a lot more healthier and whole place. And it's just allows me to say thanks be to God. And thanks be to the friends, people like you and others that just surrounded me in the desert time. And we had some times up in Colorado together. It's just, when I reflect back, I feel like in my heart, I'm just grateful to what God has done.
Man, so good. I was reflecting on this, Steve. We need more of these stories because we hear plenty of stories of the pain, but this book really is a retelling of how God invited you to embrace it. And dude, I just want to affirm you that you have. You're walking through this. Can't wait to read it myself. I'm sure it's on the way en route by the time this episode airs. And so, man, I just want to say thanks for not just putting this into words, which is a huge deal, but all the process and all the pain you've walked through so that so many of us can receive on the other side of that. So I just know so much healing is going to come from this. So thank you.
Thank you so much, man. No, I feel so, just so honored. And I think you're right. I want to know more stories. You know, it's like even in church services, we often pray for that marriage, or we pray for that healing, or we pray for that person who's struggling with this addiction or bitterness. But I sometimes wish we could have the follow-up story. You know, it's like on those home makeover shows where they go back 9 months later. It's like, I want to be able to experience that, you know, and I totally agree. I think it would be so much better if we had some of those stories.
Yeah, and there's so many people listening. I just want to speak to you if you're listening or watching this. Right now, Steve's going to go deep on his story because he goes deep in the book. And so, Steve, permission to go as deep here as you want. And friends, we're not about airing out carnage here on this podcast. We are about healing. We are about health. We are about longevity. And these are stories of that. And so please know that. There are plenty of stories out there where people are throwing rocks and about carnage. That's not Steve's heart. That's not our heart here in the heart of this message. And so, man, with that said, take me back to the moment, and you begin the book with this and the message with this, the moment when your world begins to fall apart?
Yep. So it's about 2018. It's February, and I've just submitted a manuscript that's gonna come out in the fall of 2018. And a few months prior to that, actually on the weekend of my 38th birthday, I was, and another person, announced as the successors for Bill Hybels at Willow Creek Community Church. So I was going to be the lead teaching pastor. And I was writing a book that was going to come out during the time of the installment. So that was going to be on the 43rd anniversary of Willow. And we were all looking forward to that. And so I had submitted this manuscript on 2 Timothy. And it was about Paul and Timothy's relationship. And in many ways, it was a treatise to Bill. It was I was Timothy, and I had learned so much from Bill, and I was just telling stories and just unpacking that. And I send it to my editor, and my editor calls me back and says, "Hey, great, read through it, it's awesome. I was wondering if you should add a chapter." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And she's like, "Well, adding a chapter about when a leader falls." And I was like, "Well, Paul didn't fall. He finished the race, and he includes us to finish the race well." And she's like, "Well, just think about it." So I'm like, "Okay." So I get off the phone, and I'm in another meeting, and I can't stop thinking about what my editor said. And so I actually leave the meeting, call her back, and I'm like, "Hey, you've always been really, really clear with me. Like, that was an interesting, did you not like the manuscript? Like, what, yeah, what do you mean add another chapter?" And she says, "You don't know?" And I'm like, "No, what? You don't know about the Chicago Tribune story coming?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about? The Tribune story about a pastor in Chicago and the abuse of power and sexual abuse?" And I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And if I'm really, really honest, Alan, I maybe thought of a couple of other pastors that it was like, maybe she's referencing that. And she's like, "It's Bill." I'm like, "What?" And it was like right there, it was, wait, what? And so I went, told the other leader, I told like the team, I'm like, "What is going on?" And the Tribune just started to go to work to tell a story. They had been doing months and months of interviews. And a month later in March, the story came out. By the beginning, mid-April, Bill resigns early. By May, more stories come out. And then on Sunday, August 5th, a story comes out in the New York Times about Bill's former assistant. And I just, I had been pleading and asking for the church to handle it in a certain way. And it just wasn't happening the way that I thought it should. And I'm not saying I thought I was right. I knew best, but I just felt like I couldn't play with people's trust. And I had the trust of the congregation. And so I made a difficult decision just to resign on August 5th. And that just sent my world swirling and spinning. And a few months later, we ended up moving to the desert and trying to make sense of how did this happen and what do we do now?
I don't remember a more confusing situation from the outside. And I have ties to Willow Creek as well. My dad was on staff, and so I had people calling me, and I'm like, I don't know on the outside, but the way that all of that happened, I literally cannot imagine some of the highs you were feeling, the preparation for the future, looking back at the past, all of that. But in the midst of all that swirling, God speaks to you. Very clean, clear, specific things. What were those?
Well, the first one it's probably when I resigned, we drove to Madison, Wisconsin, and I just knew that if I resign, there's going to be people who show up at our door from the media. There already had been, just in the weeks prior. And so we drove up to Madison, about 90 minutes from our house, and checked into a hotel. And the next morning I got up super early, and I was just begging God for a word. I mean, you resigned. I don't know if I'm getting paid next week. Like, I don't, you start going through, like, what did I just do? And did I do the right thing? And I think I did, but I'm not sure. And I'm feeling just the financial pressure, all of that. And I just start walking in downtown Madison super early in the morning. And I'm like, Lord, what are we, like, I need a word. You got to tell me something, please. What do I do now? And I hear nothing. I try and read an old prayer, and I'm like, please, God, just give me something. And I remember where I was sitting, I heard this audible, like, within voice that just said, grieve, breathe, receive. And I found myself like, oh my goodness. And I went to this donut shop, and I wrote down, grieve what is, grieve what I thought it was going to be, grieve how key people let me down, breathe in the new mercies, exhale all bitterness and resentment and anger, and receive what I need to learn, receive what I need to own, receive who I need to become. And those three words and those couple phrases underneath each one became this, like, mantra for me in the healing. But we still had to go from Madison back to the northwest suburbs in Chicago to our neighborhood. And it was hard to try and find healing there. And I remember one morning, early morning, just having this kind of another moment of just pressed upon just this thought where I felt like the Lord said, go to the desert and wait for instructions, because I was trying to achieve my way out of it. I was trying to figure out, okay, like, where can I go? What's a bigger city? What's a better opportunity? Because that's how I'd always handled my sadness and stress, was just look to go do something more. And I thought the desert was metaphorical. But I took out my journal and just started to write, similar to the donut shop. And I just wrote down the line, you can't achieve your way out of this. You can only grieve your way through it. And I realized, like, I don't know how to grieve. And so that morning, my wife woke up and we were making coffee, and I just told her what I had heard, go to the desert, wait for instructions. And she teared up because she's from Arizona. And she just said, I've been sensing the same thing. I just want to go home. And so 4 months after resigning, we moved to Arizona, and that became the desert season. And I'm so grateful, because I think, it's even in the Beatitudes, like, blessed are those who mourn, for the Lord is near. They'll experience the nearness of the Lord. And I feel like in my mourning and in my sadness, the nearness of the Lord showed up with those three words. The nearness of the Lord showed up with go to the desert, wait for instructions. The nearness of the Lord just showed up in the trails of the desert. I felt that in the midst of the sadness and the pain.
I fed off of really some of, as you were maturing, and some of your grief as you were even sharing with others, leading folks through the Psalms, and it was on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
And you would just go, hey, I'm literally here in the desert next to this cactus, and would sort of welcome folks in that. Tell me about that, and maybe what God did in you and in others through that time.
Well, Alan, I think you and I know this, like, oftentimes working in churches, and really, really great churches, there's a move to have Sunday mornings be, like, up and to the right, and there's a lot of high energy. And there might be a moment in a service once a month where a time of reflection for communion, maybe once a year at Good Friday might be a little bit darker, more lament or somber, or kind of oriented towards that. But usually most services, the room is just trying to lift the spirits for people to hope. And I think that's really, really beautiful in so many ways, except when you're going through crisis and sadness and you realize, oh my goodness, I've skipped leg day for years. I don't know how to lament. I don't know how to sit in the doubts and the uncertainty. I don't know how to do this. And early on in the desert, I just found myself reading Lamentations, reading through the Psalms, reading through just the chapters in the Bible and the stories and the scriptures that really dealt with that dark night of the soul. And then COVID hit, and COVID just shut everything down. And so I just started what I refer to as the evening Psalms. And it was just, I would read a Psalm in the morning, think about it during the day, and then at 5 p.m. basically hit record and say, welcome to the evening Psalms. Today we're going to look at Psalm 1. And I just started making my way through it. And it was interesting. I really didn't know what I was doing. And this little community started to form, and people from all over were just tuning in and looking forward to it. And different guests jumped on and shared a psalm. And it just was a really, really meaningful experience to almost have this collection or coalition of like the willing who wanted to lament and sit in the difficulty, but still try to find the words to say, blessed be the name of the Lord, so to do both.
And I was struck by that time, Steve. We all had a lot to grieve during COVID. We just didn't know how to name most of it. And a lot of people trying to hype us up, right? We're going to get through this and push harder and do this, maybe even hustle harder, and then your organization, company, church will be fine on the other end. As a coach, I experienced just the pure fear that people were saying, what's next? How do we do this? So I'm just struck by the fact that we needed somebody who was further down the line in grieving to recognize what we needed, and that God used you specifically in that season, in that moment. I'm struck by this, Steve. I spent a lot of time with leaders, and I have noticed leaders are neither good at grieving in the valley or celebrating on the mountaintop. I mean, really, like leaders often just suck at grieving and at celebrating. It's as if so many leaders, me included sometimes, can live on that middle frequency somewhere in the middle. I'm curious, why don't we grieve better as leaders? What is that that's holding us back?
Well, what I had to learn about myself is I didn't want to slow down. And, every Monday at 11 a.m., I would say probably for the past 20 plus years, outside of vacation or, if my wife's taken that slot, I'm in with my therapist. And I started to realize, why did I choose Monday at 11 a.m.? Oh, because I had 6 days to put it back in the box before I have to get up in front of a crowd and preach. So in one sense, I think we're afraid to slow down, but the second is we're actually afraid to be too far out of control. And so if I have to sit with my grief, I might slow down, I'll be out of control. I don't know where the emotion or the feeling or the sadness might take me. And I also feel the pressure. I got to keep moving and leading, whether a staff, a team, a ministry, a company, a not-for-profit forward. And I don't have time for this. But I think what we're also saying is I don't actually have time for my formation. And I think you just said something that I think is so profound. And I think I realized this, and I didn't know this before. Let's say if grief is in the negative numbers, and let's say -10 is like the healthiest sitting with grief. Let's say +10 is like the healthiest of like embodiment of joy and shalom and peace. What I think I realized was if I only go to a -1 or 2 in grief, I think I can only go to a +1 or 2 in joy and peace. The farther I can understand my sadness and grief, the more I can experience my mourning being turned into dancing, my mourning being turned into praise and celebration. And I had to almost realize the reason I can't celebrate is because I don't know how to grieve. And the reason I struggle with grieving is because, man, I don't actually know how to celebrate. And so when you can really sit through that, and that's where, for me, that grieve, breathe, receive really was an invitation to Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of Holy Weekend, helped me understand the importance to be the kind of person who could grieve with hope, as 1 Thessalonians 4 teaches us.
It's a good word, man. And I've noticed that communities that leaders are in or around, small groups, whatever that is even or is either a festival of celebrating how terrible life is, i.e. a den of victims, or over here we pretend that we're all killing it. We could be getting killed by it, but we're going to pretend here. And it is so hard, so rare to find that tension in the middle, to say this is a safe place to celebrate and to grieve. Both of those. It is maybe more risky to share what's going well as a leader in some of those environments, because I think we've swung the pendulum. And it's just interesting to observe it, whether it's business space, a church space, nonprofit leaders. Nobody wants to kind of say things are going really, really well. That's part of the human experience, is both of those. So I love that, man, that inverse relationship of both. Man, we could talk about that the whole time. And I want to make sure we talk about breathing as well. What do you mean when you say breathe?
So in the Holy Weekend journey, Friday is the day where, man, we didn't see that coming. That wasn't fair. That just isn't right. Why did this have to happen? And Saturday in Holy Weekend is known as Silent Saturday or Holy Saturday. And it's the day where you're wondering, what just happened? Like, how could they do that? Like, it's the day where all of a sudden, where's all this going? It's the desert season of the Old Testament Hebrew Scriptures narrative of Egypt, desert, promised land. It's that version of Holy Weekend. And Saturday is just that wandering, confusing moment. Because if you think back to those first disciples, they didn't know Sunday was coming. They didn't know resurrection was happening. All they understood was it's over. It's done. It's gone. Like, what are we going to do? And if we like put ourselves out there, we're probably going to get arrested too or beaten too. Like, we should probably start making other plans. You're going to go back to your parents and work in the fishing trade. You're going to go back to being a zealot. Like that, I think in their mind, they're just trying to make sense and of what do we do? And that's that liminality, that liminal space. That's what the desert actually teaches us. You know, when you think about the Hebrew people, when they left Egypt, they were pretty close to the promised land. They were miles and miles and miles away from it. But it took them 40 years of wandering in circles. And because, as one scholar says, it's one thing to leave Egypt, but it's another thing to have Egypt leave you. And God was after their heart. And I think in the Silent Saturday, that holy moment is us just breathing in and recognizing God is as close as the air we breathe. To breathe in those new mercies that Lamentations 3 says, to exhale all of the bitterness and anger. I had on Saturday, I had to deal with, in the desert, a lot of unforgiveness. How could this happen? Why did this happen? Why? What? Where's the justice in this? And it's there where I felt like God was able to do just the beginning healing that led to the Sunday surprise.
So much there that we don't have time to get into. Again, pick up the book. There's more of the story here. We're just really overviewing this. But what really struck me is I literally see you as we were celebrating a dear friend, Peb Jackson, in Colorado, in the snow, if you remember, in the spring. I believe it was May. And I said, what's next? And you're like, we're actually moving back home. And tell me about that process and what was going on. I know that obviously some family dynamics and things beyond that, but what was going on in Steve that felt like, man, it's actually time to return to the place, even the place that you had received so much pain?
Yep. So my son was in 8th grade, and, you know, when everything went down in 2018, we pulled him out, and it was right before the second semester of 5th grade was going to start. So he didn't really get a chance to say fully goodbye to his friends. And we moved to Arizona, starting a school, and then it's tricky to make friends the second semester. You start making friends, you know, the fall of 2019, and then COVID happens in March of 2020. So he starts making friends, then COVID happens. He's not in school, he's online. The whole time he's staying connected via Fortnite and Zoom, or to his friends in the Northwest suburbs. And so I just asked him, my wife and I just asked him, hey, when you go into high school, we don't want to move. Where would you want to be? Do you want to be in Arizona? Where do you want to be? And without missing a beat, he said, I just want to go home. I was like, where's home? He's like, our old neighborhood. And I just looked at my wife and I was like, there's no way. There's no way. And for her, there's no way. I didn't think. And she was like, we should pray about it and think about it. And so we prayed about it for a couple weeks, and I was like, they're going to change their mind. There's no way. Who moves back to their personal Chernobyl? And yet at the same time, I wanted to give our kids agency to name their desires. And so as we started praying for it and leaning into it more, it just seemed like the next best right step. And we moved back 20 doors down from where we used to live. I'm serving in a church about 25 minutes from there. And my son is thriving. And what I also realized is another mutual friend, Daniel Grossi, at the same time had written a book called The Power of Place. And he sent me the kind of galley copy to endorse. And I was reading it on a plane and I just started weeping because he was talking about how all of these, leaders, many that we know, Teresa of Calcutta, St. Francis of Assisi, they all were connected to a place. And yeah, that's right, bro. That's right. And I called Daniel and I was like, I thought I had left that. And I realized I thought I was just called to a church, not to a place. And I'll never forget, Daniel's just saying, you're Steve of Chicagoland. It's okay. Embrace that. And he kind of said this verse from Ezekiel 36 to go and rebuild and restore those broken places. And it just was such a moving moment for me that in one sense, I thought I was just doing what was best for my kid, but I felt like God was doing what was best for his kid in me and bringing me back to a place that was home and a place that I just absolutely love. It's Big Ten country. It's the Midwest. It just is. It's seasons. It's just a place that I really, really deeply love and admire.
So how was that move back and away from the desert connected, and that topography connected to you receiving?
Yeah, so I think Sunday represents the surprise. Like I said, the disciples didn't see resurrection happening. And I think sometimes in our grief, as we grieve with hope, what we're hoping is to be surprised by what the Lord's going to do. And sometimes that surprise is a new relationship. Sometimes it's a new opportunity. Sometimes it's just a newfound healing. I didn't expect the surprise to be to move back to Chicagoland, but that was the surprise that God had for us, just one of the many. And it's been something that once you feel that, that, like, oh, this is what the Lord's inviting us. That's the next best right step for our personal healing and renewal. It's just been a real gift. Got this great community here in Forest City, in Elgin, and in Rockford, and just been able to be a part of a team again. And I just feel so just fortunate to be back in a place I love. My family's healthy. We survived the difficulty, and we're continuing to make new stories and new memories. And I'm continuing to do what I love to do, teach and write and coach and hang with great people like you. And just feel so thankful that there was hope on the other side.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful. I love that word, fortunate. How is new Steve different from old Steve?
It's a great question. I think there's a different level of presence. I think there's a different level on that continuum of my ability to sit in the moments that I feel sad or powerless. And instead of trying to escape through ambition or work or chasing and striving and achieving, I think I've just been able to sit and keep the main thing, as Jesus teaches in John 15, like to remain in him. And I think it's just brought even a deeper level to my teaching, a deeper level to my ability to pastor. And I think there's just something that's been, I don't need it as much as I once did. I now feel like I have a gift that I get to give rather than needing something from other people. It's just like, hey, I hope this will help you. I think this will help you along the way. And so I think people have like said that. I feel not as hurried, a little bit slower. And in some ways it feels great, but in other ways it feels like, am I accomplishing at the same level? So it's like, so there's a little like, I'm even still having to try that on and learn it, but a lot more grace and a lot more peace.
Beautiful. So much of this follows the arc of Brueggemann talks about orientation, disorientation, reorientation. And in almost any hero's journey, there is that moment that knocks you loose and some screws loose to say, what is happening? And you're describing it in the disciples, you're describing it in your own life. I get the privilege of walking so many leaders through that disorientation in the middle. But there's that rebuilding, redesigning, and reorienting to a new way. And I see that in you. And it's interesting. I didn't know the old Steve up close, only at a distance. And now to know you, man, just graced by your presence. I can feel it in the room. I watch that as you're with guys. And so just to affirm that, man, we need more leaders who don't need it. And that presence that you're already bringing, especially to younger leaders out there, especially to leaders who have some bit of fame or following, that you're gonna, that presence, that new Steve is gonna ground so many leaders. Incredible to hear that, man. One more thought before we head into the always feared lightning round. It's coming, man. So I just want in the back of your mind for you to be terrified as I ask you this. Of course, we'll leave with some encouragement for everybody here on the other side of this. Man, this whole book, I know you've put your heart into, your mind into, you've edited too many rounds, all of that, and you believe the whole thing is helpful. But what particular part of the book do you think, man, this part of it, little section, phrase, word, chapter, is actually going to be the most helpful?
For me, it was around forgiveness. And I think anyone who's experienced betrayal and therapists, spiritual directors will talk and tell you that betrayal trauma is one of the worst. Just talk to anyone who's experienced a parent abandoning or a spouse cheating or a business partner bouncing. That level of betrayal, there's often no closure. And right. And so now you're just left holding the bag, and so the question is like, what are you going to do with it? And I think one of the most beautiful gifts that our faith gives us is the gift of forgiveness. Jesus shows up in John 20, post-resurrection. All of the disciples are huddled together. They're nervous. He shows up, appears, and he just says, peace be with you. He says it again, peace be with you. He breathes on them with resurrection breath. And then he says, receive the Spirit, reminds them of the mission. And then he says the most common sense line, Alan. He says, and if you choose to forgive, they'll be forgiven. And if you don't forgive, they won't be forgiven. And I think that for many of us, we are holding unforgiveness in our heart. And unforgiveness is a seed that will only lead to more anger, bitterness, gossip, slander, rage, brawling, everything. And one of the greatest gifts is that forgiveness allows us to flush our system of it. And forgiveness is a solo sport. It's just you and me just choosing, like, I'm going to forgive. But I'm actually tenderizing my heart so that if, and sometimes it will never happen, but if that person ever wants to show up and say, and repent and say they're sorry, that you've actually done the work, that you can sit across the table and allow for reconciliation to happen. But if we don't choose forgiveness, we won't ever want to reconcile. And so I had this little mantra, it's in the book, but it's called cross, release, send it away. I carried a small little brown cross with me in my pocket. And anytime someone who hurt me would come to mind, I just would grab that cross and just say, cross, release, send it away. And it was just, it was a way for me to practice the gift of forgiveness and not let that stay in my heart, my mind, my body, and my soul.
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right, man, you know what time it is. The lightning round. So many guests fear. By the way, we only take the best guests through it, or the ones who won't be offended, the ones we think can handle it. So just take it as a compliment anytime we throw the lightning round at you. Here we go, man. And we are going deep. We're going to start with this one. What's your favorite sugary cereal?
Frosted Flakes.
What's a food that you go to during a Michigan football game?
At a game, it's going to be a brat.
I love how much you love Michigan football. It is so fun to watch. All right. So what is a family memory over the last few years that you're just cherishing right now?
That's a great question. Lightning round, we would just do family walks in the desert at night and just to watch the sunset. And the colors, this in Arizona, like the sky, the sunsets are just next level.
One little thing that feels dumb that you do it, but for whatever reason brings you life.
It's probably Michigan football. So it just brings me so much life.
A big thing. Big house, big thing. What is one quote that you find yourself saying a lot?
Trust is a mathematical formula. Safe plus consistent, again and again, over and over on repeat, makes you worthy of trust. Unsafe, consistent, again and again, over and over, makes you unworthy of trust. And safe but inconsistent, again and again, over and over on repeat, makes you unworthy of trust. Question is, are you worthy of trust?
Now, who said that?
My counselor said a version of it, and then I've just been playing with it, and I just say it all the time. Basically, in every sermon I say, I just want people to know God is safe and consistent. And as a church, we need to be the kind of people who are safe and consistent and worthy of people's trust.
Love it. That'll preach. Movie that you absolutely love?
A Good Will Hunting.
One environment you're in and you absolutely disappear into. You are that much in love with the environment.
The water or the mountains.
A person in your life you want to shout out right now because they've been a huge support to you the last few years.
John Ortberg.
So good, dude. We can keep coming. A few more. A book you've reread or regularly reread?
The Divine Conspiracy.
Some good ones here, man. Something easy in regular life that for whatever reason you suck at.
Anything around the house that is broken that needs to be fixed, because Home Depot gives me anxiety.
Yes. All right, man. A guilty pleasure song that's dumb or ridiculous or silly or a little girly that you end up singing in the car with the windows down when nobody else is around.
I have a 10-year-old daughter, so it's all things Taylor Swift right now. And I say I do it for her, but I also am doing it for myself. I'm not afraid to admit it.
I also am the problem. It's me, Steve. I don't know if you knew that. I do the same. My 10-year-old daughter, all right? It's her fault.
Baby, I got bad blood, so.
Why do I keep singing it by myself, though? That's how much I love my daughter. Good to know, man. Steve, it's been incredible to have you. And I just thought the way to end this, there are plenty of leaders hurting right now. Plenty of leaders listening to this, struggling to believe that the receive piece is coming, the reorientation piece is coming, the growth, the maturity, and they feel stuck in that. And I just wanted to leave you the chance to encourage the leader right now who's hurting, who's in it, and maybe even feels like they're going to be stuck in it forever. What do you say to encourage that leader here on the way out?
Well, my brothers and sisters, wherever you are, it's not the end of the story. As difficult, as dark, as sad, as much pain and adversity and uncertainty is before you, may you be someone who can grieve with hope. And as you stay forth, one step in front of the other, may your heart, your mind, your body, your soul stay open, because Sunday is coming. The surprise is coming, because God is near and God cares for you. Don't grow weary in doing good. Continue to open yourself up to what He wants to do, and let Him work through the redemption of this painful story into something that is going to help so many other people.
May it be so. Friends, pick up a book, and it is called Grieve, Breathe, Receive. That's hard to say. Grieve, Breathe, Receive. Go ahead and grab it on Amazon, friends. Steve, I cannot wait to crack open this. Thanks so much for stopping by the podcast. Grateful for you, man.
Thanks so much, bro. Appreciate you.